Today our topic is a new financial service that is factoring, which is provided by a factor. Factor is a third party. In a business, we have client and customer. Here the company is the client. Company is selling goods on credit to customer. Customer is signing invoice and giving back to the client. Okay. And client is submitting this copy of invoice to the factor. As soon as the factor receives this copy of document, they pay 80 to 90% immediately. They pay amount to the client, and balance amount they will pay after they collect the amount from the customer. So after the customer pays this amount on the due date, factor will pay the balance amount, deducting the commission and the operating cost of the factor, which is around 10 to 20%. So factoring is an arrangement between the factor and the client in which company is a client, firm is a client, which gets advance in return for receivables from a financial institution at a discounted price of 80% of the document. This contract is similar to bailment contract. That means converting the receivables into cash. The firm converts document into cash, invoice into cash, receivables into cash. So here the factor is responsible for non-payment by the customer. If customer is not paying, the factor will take a responsibility. He will bear the loss of not paying, customer not paying, that is bad debts for the factor. So in factoring, the risk is on the head of factor because he is not getting money from the customer. So it can happen like that. If customer is not paying amount, then factor will be having bad debts. Because he already paid the amount of 80% to the client. Immediately he paid. So this is factoring. This invoice is bills of exchange. Bill of exchange. Bill of exchange, firm will submit to the factor. Client will submit this bill of exchange to the factor. Factor will immediately pay 80% of the amount which is written in the bill of exchange. Okay, so here the dators of who is the dator? Dator means if you are selling goods on credit, who is the dator? Dator is your customer who is going to pay to the client. But instead of paying to the client, now he is not a dator of client, he is the dator of factor. Because factor has paid 80% of the amount to the client. So for factor, for this financial institution, for this services of factoring of receivables, he already paid the amount as soon as he received the bill of exchange with him. Okay, so under this factoring, this is the assignment that now it is not a dator of client. Customer is not a dator of client. Customer is the dator of factor. Factor, this person is very skilled person. They are doing this type of work from many years. They are meeting different clients, they are meeting different customers, and they are able to manage their credit. So why we are studying this topic, factoring in working capital? This maybe you are thinking it's a different topic, factoring and working capital is different. No, it's not different. Working capital will come under factoring also. Factor will help you to give you money immediately. It is giving you 80 to 90% money that is helping you to carry on your business smoothly. Okay, instead of taking a bank loan, just you are giving your receivables to your factor, and factor is giving you money immediately. It is just like discounting the bill of exchange. It is just like discounting the bill of exchange with the bank. Okay, if factor is not getting money from the customer, the risk of loss will be bared by the factor, that is the financial institution that is giving money 80% to 90% to the firm. So the burden of collecting money from the debtor is completely transferred to the factor. Now what he is getting, what compensation factor will get? Factor will get some compensation like commission, okay, service charge. Factor will get commission for doing this job. He is advancing the money to the client within 24 hours of receiving the document. Factor will receive the bill of exchange and he will give 80% of the bill of exchange to the client. So many documents are exchanged by the client with the factor. Many documents, many accounts receivables, they will transfer it to the factor. Who is the collector? Collector is the factor. Factor will collect the money and the check from the customer. Factor will collect money from the customer, that is debtor. We have practical problems. After appointing a factor, there is a reduction in the bad debts because they have very good skills to collect money from the debtors, from the customer. So factoring, they come with a skilled service. They have a good training how to collect money from people, how to collect check from people who are not willing to pay. And they keep on doing follow up till till they get money from the customer. Types of factoring: recourse and non-recourse. In this type of arrangement, factor can resort to the firm when the debts are not recoverable, so the risk associated with the trade debts are not assumed by the factor. On the other hand, non-recourse factoring, the factor cannot recourse to the firm in case of debt turn out to be irrecoverable. So we are talking about bad debts. What happens when the customer is not paying money to the factor? If it is non-payment of amount, what will happen? In the recourse factoring, factor will collect money from the client. If there is non-payment of customer on the due date, factor is not getting money from the customer. Directly the factor in recourse factoring, you will collect money from the client. If any bad debts, client will pay all the money back. Okay. Client will give money to the factor in case of non-payment of amount by the customer to the factor. What happens in the case of non-recourse factoring? What happens in the case of non-recourse factoring? Opposite. Client is not going to give you anything. Client will say, I'm not responsible for bad debts. Okay. In non-recourse factoring, if customer is not paying the amount to the factor, the amount is not recoverable. So client will not pay anything. In case of non-payment of amount, client will not pay anything in case of non-recourse factoring. In recourse factoring, factor can recover the amount from the client, but in case of non-recourse factoring, factor agent cannot collect money from the client. So client is getting credit protection in case of non-recourse factoring, full credit protection to the client, because he's not going to bear any risk of loss of non-payment by the customer. So this is the case of recourse factoring. In recourse factoring, client will pay the non-paid amount by customer to the factor. In non-recourse factoring, client will not pay to the factor anything which customer is not paying. I hope you have understood. When there is a bad debt, credit risk are not associated with the trade debts, are not assumed by the factor. On the other hand, in non-recourse factoring, the factor cannot recover the amount to the firm. Recourse means recoverable from the client. Customer not paying, we will inform the client that we have not received any amount. Client will repay the amount which is not paid by customer. In case of non-recourse factoring, amount is not recoverable from the client. If customer is not paying, client will also not pay anything to you. So which is risky for the factor? For the factor, this is risky. Non-recourse factoring, commission will be higher in the non-recourse factoring in comparison to recourse factoring, because full risk is taken by the factor of non-payment of debts by the customer. If full risk is taken by the factor, then he is going to charge you extra commission for that. Disclosed and undisclosed factoring. The factoring in which the factor's name is disclosed in the invoice by the supplier of goods or services asking the purchaser to pay the factor is called disclosed factoring. Here the supplier will immediately inform the customer that he is the person to whom you have to pay. He is the person to whom you have to pay. This is a factor. Name of the factor will be written in the invoice. If we don't mention this name in the factor's name, if it is not mentioned in the invoice, conversely, the form of factoring in which the name of factor is not mentioned in the invoice by the manufacturer or the supplier, in such a case, the factor means the sales ledger. He's going to make a sales ledger. Of the client, and the debt is realized in the name of the firm. However, the control is in the hands of the factor. So if we disclose the name already, it will be easy. It will be easy for the customer to pay to the factor because he knows the name of the factor, at least it is written in the invoice. But if we don't write the name of the factor, he is going to make a sales account in the name of the client, and whatever amount he will realize, he will receive, he will write by cash account debit, by bank account debit to client sales account. So disclosed and undisclosed means you are revealing the name of the factor in the invoice itself. So this is disclosed factoring, and second is vice versa, undisclosed factoring. The factor will maintain the sales ledger of the client, and the debt realized will be written on the credit side, that is by bank account, by cash account received. Next, domestic and export factoring. When the three parties to factoring, that is customer, client, factor, reside in same country, then this is called domestic factoring. Client, second customer, and factor, and factor, they are in the same country. Okay, they reside in the same country, and this is called as domestic factoring. Second, export factoring means cross-border factoring. The other name of export factoring is cross-border factoring, in which there are four parties involved. First is the exporter, client is the exporter, and importer is customer. That means they are into two different countries, right? Customer is importer. Our goods are going in the foreign. Importer. Number three, factor. So there are two factors involved. One is export factor and second is import factor. Export factor and second is import factor. So in the case of export factoring, there are 4 parties. Exporter, client is staying in one country, importer, second country, export factor and import factor. This is also termed as two-factor system. Two-factor, there are 2 factors, 2 agents, 2 institutions involved in collecting money from the customer. Export factor and import factor. So this is factoring. Next is advanced and maturity factoring. In advanced factoring, the factor gives an advance to the client against the uncollected receivables. So 80 to 90% of the amount after collecting the documents, you have to give it 80 to 90% of amount to the client, that is firm. In maturity factoring, the factoring agency does not provide any advance to the firm. In maturity factoring, we are not paying any amount to the firm. Instead, the bank collects the sum from the customer. So your bank is collecting money from the customer and pays to the firm, either on the date on which the amount is collected from the customer or on a guaranteed payment date or on a due date. So this is opposite of advanced factoring. Maturity factoring is opposite of advanced factoring. Here in advanced factoring, you are giving 80% of invoice to the client. In advance, you are giving 80% of invoice to the client. Client is giving you accounts receivable, documents, all invoices, and you are giving against, immediately you are giving 80%. But in maturity factoring, you are giving on the due date, you are collecting on the due date, and then you are paying to the client. That means the factor will collect money from the customer first. Okay. In maturity factoring, collect money from customer first. Collect from customer. And then collect from the customer. Second, pass this money to client. Pass money to client. So this is on maturity. Customer will pay you on the due date. You can collect. Factor will collect. Factor is an institutional agent. Factor is an institution. It is collecting money on the due date from the customer, and second responsibility is to pass this money to the client and take the commission for collecting money from the customer on the due date. So this is called as maturity factoring. It is opposite of advanced factoring. In advanced factoring, you are giving money immediately, 80% of the document or the bill of exchange.